Hey everyone, it's Dr. Sally, and this is Hope Illuminated. It's a podcast where we share powerful stories and science and well being strategies. Here, isolation and despair can be defeated and a passion for living rekindled. No flashlights required for your journey, just fired up listeners ready to gain guidance from our international experts. And today is no exception. I'm here with the wonderful Julia Hassall, originally from Perth, Australia, but currently living in LA. We got introduced by a mutual friend, Susan Murray, who is well known around the globe for her advocacy in the zero suicide movement. And we just kind of connected and hit it off. And she's got some really exciting things to share with you today about healing from the trauma of suicide. Julia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Sally. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we are connected because of our shared loss in our lives, and we'll unpack that as we go today. You, like many others I have met, have done such a graceful and beautiful job of turning some very, very difficult times into your life into incredible healing for yourself and for others. And I'm just really honored to bring you into this conversation to share that wisdom. But tell our listeners a little bit more about how you serve today. What do you do in the world?
Yes, thank you. So I was formerly a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, and after losing my father to suicide, I actually moved into the mental health space. So I currently work as a therapist, a neurosomatic coach, and a speaker, speaking about lived experience and also doing mental health education in communities, for treatment centers, and for now workplaces as well. So my mission is really just to share both my lived experience of healing and to also talk to multidimensional areas of mental health, including mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, so now you know why we're become fast friends. We have a lot of shared passions and approaches to this very, very difficult kind of human condition. And I think one of the things when I was reading about your history, when you talked about the road less traveled and the work of Scott Peck and the phrase "life is difficult," I think there are many chapters in your life in our lives where we're just like, this is really hard, whether it's a loss or our mental health struggles or transitions that we didn't see coming and so forth. And that just really resonated with me. So share a little bit about your why and your story of your family and your journey to this moment.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Well, I mean, I'll share about my story first, and then I might go into that line from Scott Peck's book that was a really powerful and profound one for me. But I grew up in Perth, Australia, and I grew up to immigrant parents. And life at home was quite dysfunctional and very challenging. And it was made harder by losing my father, which was quite a significant experience, but later on at 30 years old. So my father was my best friend. He was my mentor. He was really everything to me. And losing him was a shock. It was an absolute shock. And at the time he was caring for my mother, who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So my parents had been together since they were 16 and they had a really beautiful relationship. And my dad had given up work to care for my mother. So she was diagnosed in her early 50s and I was in my 20s at that stage. Um, and my dad gave up work to care for her, and ultimately it was overwhelming for him, and
Mm.
he took his life. So, you know, I mean, there was a lot that happened after that. But really, that bond was so strong. And, I think the anger of this loss actually really fueled my passion and my ambition and this has to change.
Mm.
My dad is actually one of four people who have suicided in my family.
Wow.
So he was really the person that made me go, I can't just sit around and live, an ordinary life without channeling everything I have into finding new ways to help and to discover new ways of healing, because I believe that our systems right now are just not working as well as they could.
Was there a moment where you felt called into it? I remember for me, like I was going to the support group in this church basement, and everyone was going around the circle and sharing their pain. And there was just so much raw feelings and sadness in the room. And I thought, oh my gosh, someone's got to do something about this. And then I felt like this like lightning bolt. I'm like, oh crap, it's me. Like I got to do something about this. Okay, here we go. And I just felt really pulled and called into it. Did you have a moment like that where you're like clarity? I got to go, or did it kind of creep in over time?
Yeah. It was interesting. I would say I had some mystical experiences after his loss. And I think one thing that stood out as you were talking, I agree. I think there's a moment where you're like, wow. I was working with a Chinese medicine doctor who I really respected, and I would go in there and I was just a mess. I would cry and I was like, I want to help people. I don't want anyone to feel this pain. I don't want anyone to feel this pain. Because I was obviously so depressed after that experience. And she looked at me, and I'll never forget the way she looked at me at one point. She had these piercing blue eyes, and, she was also, a bit of a medium or psychic in her work. And she goes, you're going to be helping a lot of people. You're going to help a lot of people. And at the time, I was like, that's all I want to do, and then I sat with that and I was like, actually, I'm going to help a lot of people. And I really, from that point, even though I was still so early on in my journey, I just discovered this inner strength that was just indomitable. And to me, there was no other way that I could live my life other than to set on this path. And I didn't know how I was going to get there in the state that I was in. But I just knew that this story, even telling it anecdotally, had just been so powerful on the people around me. And just knowing who my father was and understanding the discourse around suicide and some of the stigma around it, it even made me go, wow, like, you know, I would say I was quite open-minded about suicide and things like that. And then when it happens to you, it really blows your awareness open of, just um, how wrong a lot of people have it, and how much
Yes.
stigma they around it, and how many misconceptions there are around it. So it really challenged even some kind of deeper stereotypes for me. And I thought, wow, I really need to be sharing this with more people so I can help illuminate
Mm.
this for others.
That's right. Yeah. There are so many deflections and blaming of things that are not the cause and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think there's a lot of out there that's not right. It's just an easier narrative kind of thing. You talk about pain being a doorway, and pain can be very overwhelming and shut people down, but it is often for many of us a I read a book that called it a crucible. It's a place where we forge a new thing out of things that were so painful that then turn into this passion, this purpose. Um, what did you mean when you said pain is a doorway?
Um, I really do believe that in our challenges lies our greatest strengths.
Mhm.
And, this is talked about a lot and it can sound cliche, but really, going back to that book that we talked about earlier, I know we're jumping around, but the start of the book says the introduction is life is difficult, right? And I read that in a very challenging time in my life where I thought things in my life were going to get better, and they actually got more challenging. And it hit me and made me realize the reality of life is that it's really challenging, right? And, you know, the fact is we are going to be dealing with challenges at all stages of our life. And obviously some will be more challenging and some will be, more tolerable. But it's about what we do. How do we make lemonade from those lemons?
Mm-hmm.
And really, I do find that those that have had some of the most significant pain have the potential for, the greatest healing, the greatest joy. Um, the darker our darkness is, the lighter our light can shine. And I truly believe that there is incredible ability to transform what we have gone through and to become more compassionate, more wise, more
Mm-hmm.
self-loving, more open. And for example, I was in a career that was just soul destroying and making me so unhappy. And now I am so enjoy in what I do. I love what I do. I feel so fulfilled. And often these painful experiences are actually helping us drive us closer to our more authentic self, to who we really are. So, these days when I experience pain or difficulty, yes, it's like stubbing your toe. You yell and scream at first, but then you have a moment of like, okay, what am I learning from this? You know, what can we do to course correct? And how can I change myself so that you know I don't experience this, or I can make a situation better and use it for a greater potential. So I guess that's what I meant in that way. And I certainly know I feel a lot more powerful and in my purpose than I ever did before any of these experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. I just try to imagine in this point in your life where you've lost four people to suicide. You have a mother that needs care, another family member that's destabilized. It's overwhelming. It's very hard to know where to put your focus, where to, plan how to plan for a future, that kind of thing. But I think through that, you found some clarity on where your energy needed to be. And I don't know if it's true for you, but I have found that energy, even when things are hard, it doesn't waver very much. I mean, it's just always there. It's like, I cannot not do this. Like, I don't know another pathway. This was pretty much how I found myself on the planet. Like, oh, this is why I'm here. Um, and what I love about your healing journey is it's so very much in that spiritual realm of a calling, of a purpose. I think obviously I'm a psychologist. I believe in the mind and I believe in emotional regulation. And I believe in, for many people, medicine can be a real big helpful aspect of their healing. But I think there's something bigger that often happens for people to sustain a sense of true healing and true recovery. And so I'm curious to learn more about what that spiritual part of your pathway was for you.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, well, I guess the spiritual part started with the experiences I was having and the connections that I was having with my dad after he passed. We were very bonded, and we were very, very, very close to the point that at the time that he passed, I didn't know it, but I was having a physiological reaction that was really extreme. Um, and later I found out that that was the exact time that he had passed away. So I was really realizing that there is more to life than what we can just see. And I realized that I could have this relationship with this person on the other side, um, and it could be so meaningful for me, but in different ways.
Hmm.
So, this whole new relationship opened up, which was really, really beautiful. And I realized actually my dad might be more powerful to me on the other side. Um, and we might be able to do even better work together with him when he's there. Um, and this was really funny because at the time I was a lawyer and I was still, you know, more leaning towards just the logic, fact, and science in the way that I thought. Um, so basically, what happened is I started to trying to understand some of these experiences that I was having. I read a book on the afterlife. It's called A Lawyer Presents the Evidence for the Afterlife. So I even had to read a book which was written by a lawyer, and it's fantastic if anyone wants to read it. Um, and then I started studying neuroscience and listening to top doctors talking about energy and, studying ancient wisdom. And it really bridged between the 3D and the spiritual world and understanding that through the language of neuroscience. So I went on to study neuroscience, and really, in my view, start to understand how we are connecting to things outside of ourselves all the time, and that we really have the power to connect our bodies to many things from the outside. I always say that a lot of the information I receive, or a lot of, they talk about scientists, many scientists were mystics and they believed they were receiving information. People don't know that Einstein was that way.
Ah,
So, it's really interesting to think about that like that, and to think we're really a vessel, and we are working with something that's greater than ourselves. And we do also have this wonderful opportunity to connect with, the universe, spirits, ancestors. And there's such a power in that because we're not alone anymore. We
yeah.
have these things we can call upon and we can get into the rhythm of that. So I'm hoping that answers the question.
I have so many follow-up questions. So, and again, for those of you who've listened and followed a little bit of some of my passions, you can understand why I was like, Julia, we got to talk on my podcast because, I also had very strong experiences with my brother after he passed for like the first 4 months. And then I was starting to get used to it. Like he'd come visit me in dreams and he would just download all this stuff he was learning to me. And then, 4 months in, I can remember it as clear as today, it's 21 years ago, but he said, I gotta go. I got stuff I gotta do. And I was like, what, wait, what? No, you can't leave me again. I was so upset. But I agree, like there's a lot more he's taught me over these years, and I still feel his presence all the time. And I forgot the part of your story where you had that physical experience when your dad passed. Some of my listeners may know that my dad just passed on January 30th. It's February 10th, so it's still very new. And we were with him, 16 months in hospice. And so long death tale. But when it came to the end, I was with him very closely the last few days. And we gathered the family, we held hands, we shared stories and tears. And then eventually we had to go. And so I went to bed that night, and next morning I got a call from my mother, and she said, well, he passed sometime between 12 and 2. I said, Mom, I know he passed at 12:52 exactly, because
Wow.
I woke up with a bolt, and I said, he's gone. And I felt the same kind of thing, that just this very clear message of he's gone. And it's really profound. And I know that many others have had those kind of internal lights that have gone off when these big things have happened. So grateful that you kind of took that to the next level, because I hid all of this after my brother died because I thought I was losing my mind, and like curiously peeked around the corners in like psychic places and just felt like, oh gosh, can someone talk to me from a science perspective about this? And just couldn't hear it until I started talking with people like you, and they started validating things. Right now, you mentioned the lawyer on the Afterlife book. For me, one of these eye-opening things that has happened since the beginning of the year is the telepathy tapes, and I'm not sure if you have heard of those, but man, every episode I'm like, wow, another aspect of this mystical world that we live in. And using the term, we are just vessels here, that are are passing through in all kinds of time dimensions. It's really fascinating to think about. But she also, that podcast brings on a lot of physicists and neuroscientists, and they're just as equally in awe as we are for going through it. So thank you so much for creating those connections for people, that you don't have to have one camp or the other camp. It's all interwoven at this point. Um, so talk a little bit more about what you learned in your research around neuroscience and brain spotting and healing through this connection, these spiritual connections and bodily healing. Like, what have you learned?
I've learned a lot. I guess I'll start a little bit since we're on the topic about just, I mean, the way I see trauma functioning in the body. So, I did some really technical studies on neuroscience, and then I did a postgraduate diploma at the King's College London um, on neuroscience of mental health. And, we were studying, I was actually studying the body and understanding that we are just balls of electricity, right? So you're literally calculating something called an action potential, which is essentially the millivoltage of the cell that needs to create a connection, to create a pathway to make an action happen in the body, right? So a signal has to go off, and it has to be at a certain voltage, and that creates an action in the body, whether it be movement, talking, emotion. Everything is connected to a pathway and a signaling in the body that is actually electric, right? So, just talking to trauma a little bit, when we have trauma, if we think about our bodies being these conductive systems and these pathways having different levels of conductivity, when trauma happens in the body, so trauma is any experience that is overwhelming for the nervous system. So our nervous system, remember, is these electrical currents that are going through that are controlling all of our actions and behaviors. And everything in our body, from chemical signaling to breathing to heart rate. Whenever we have trauma, that is disrupting the electrical signaling in the body, right? So it's kind of making things, I like to think of it as like sparking out or creating tensions in the body. Um, and of course, when that happens, there is tensions and disruptions at all levels of the body, in emotional regulation, in our behaviors, in the way we can connect with others, right? Because there's less of a flow of energy. Um, Everything, our heart rate's disrupted, our cortisol changes, our hormones change. Um, and of course, if we're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, the electric field is also what's connecting us to the spiritual realm and to what they call the unified field. So if we've got a lot of disruption in our body and this signaling is not working as it should and it's not coherent, we often use the term coherence in neuroscience, um, there's going to be pattern disrupt in all areas of our life. And that includes how we feel internally, how we feel amongst others, and, our connection to our environment. So, they often talk about fight, flight, or fright, fight, fight, fight. No, I've forgotten. Fight or
Freeze.
flight, fight, flight, or freeze. And if you've got, you know, a lot of us exhibit multiple states in trauma. So at one point we might be freezing or we might be in fight. But we're often, what we're doing when we're trying to heal the trauma is actually just creating the coherence again. So everything is moving internally and we're able to connect with our environment again in some sort of ease and flow.
Mhm.
Uh, so, I mean, there were a bunch of questions there, but I think maybe what you wanted to go into is also talking about the brain spotting, which has been a really big practice for my healing and how I like to work.
Yes,
Is that
right. It just made me think of a whole bunch of things, which is, I remember when the pandemic hit and I was just so flooded with everything as everybody was around the world. And um, getting that sense of coherence. I love that word. I hadn't heard that before. Through meditation, through grounding and actually being in nature, was how I got through. And I don't know how I would have coped otherwise. And I always said, I'm too hyper. Like I can't sit still. If I try to meditate, I just fall asleep. It's never going to work. And then I was like, I gotta learn how to do this because I needed to get that sense of coherence back again. So that was just a beautiful way to put that experience. And then, you said like you feel more coherent in your body, but also in between people with our mirroring neurons and picking up the energy of other people. We can start to feel like when that's staticky or when it's coherent. And then you put enough people in a community together that are all just not coherent, all disrupted. And you get a lot of what we're seeing today in many of our communities that are so violent and just on edge constantly. So it's a really important way to put it. But yes, I'm interested in the transition now from kind of that level of healing, having the connection with spirituality with your dad, and then your internal healing with this connection with regulating through spiritual connections to brain spotting. Like, how did that pathway happen?
Yeah, brain spotting is something that I discovered kind of in my healing journey, and probably about 5 years ago. Um, I had done a lot of reading on my on the nervous system because I had become so interested in neuroscience and I'd really been looking at nervous system regulation and which is, a topic that's becoming more and more popular. But I had been on medication for a number of years and I'd been on medication and I'd done talk therapy to death and I was just not getting anywhere. And at this point, I was so frustrated with the system because, of course, I had seen what had happened with my dad. And I knew that the problem lay deeper from my studies and everything that I was doing. So I read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I really started to study kind of latest methods of healing um, from, the very spiritual to the very scientific. I did neurofeedback. I trained in neurofeedback, which is, essentially putting a machine on your head and reading your brain waves and then reprogramming them. Then I was studying, coherence through meditation. But I was reading that book and knowing that I really had developmental trauma, which is early life trauma, which means that the brain and the body in particular are impacted in ways so that you have quite high experiences of dysregulation. And it's very hard, I believe, with developmental trauma to, especially to work through it with um,
Mm.
talk therapy alone. So, I do think I want to also say I think medication is fantastic for people. I think it has a lot of value. And, I've used it at various times in my life. It's not something that I need anymore, which I'm grateful for. But I think that there can be limitations and issues with medication as well. So, I do find that some of these therapies access healing at a deeper level to the point that we may not need something
Yep.
like medication if we really get to a deeper place with it. So brain spotting was one of the things that came up as I was researching, and I like to be at the very tip. Oh, I like to know what's happening in any I'm very innovative and I like to be at the top of the trends basically. So I was researching everything and finding out what the latest thing was, and brain spotting came up. And brain spotting is essentially a type of somatic healing practice that's accessed through the eyes. So EMDR was the original form of, I like to think of brain spotting as a better version of EMDR.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. Hold up. You just cut out for a second as you were trying to explain that, and EMDR was the thing that dropped. So we're going to back up, and you're going to
Mhm.
start again with the brain spotting and EMDR relationship. Okay, hold on. So tell me a little bit about how brain spotting works. And you mentioned it has something to do with the eyes. And the thing that I'm familiar with is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I learned it back in graduate school. And, is it connected to that? Is it something different than that?
Yes, yes, it is. So brain spotting was actually born out of EMDR. I believe EMDR is about 60 or 50 years old, and brain spotting was discovered in 2003 by a man called David Grand. So David Grand was like a lead trainer for EMDR and worked with a lot of high profile athletes and clients. And he found that he was getting stuck in his work with EMDR. So EMDR uses eye movements to process trauma in the brain. And it is a really effective therapy for people. And at this point, there is a lot of really great clinical evidence on EMDR. But brain spotting came, I think 30 to 40 years later, and also uses eye movements to track and reprocess trauma in the brain. Um, the thing about brain spotting is we're working more somatically and it's more fluid in the practice. So, the idea, I'll give you a little bit of background about why the eyes are really important. So, when we go to bed at night, we experience REM sleep. And REM sleep actually enables us to process our memories and experiences from the day. Now, when we've had trauma, we or when we've had trauma or something overwhelming happen, our body and our brain don't quite have that filing system working as well. So at night when we go to process those memories, we there is more difficulty in processing that. And what can happen is that we have unprocessed material that you can kind of think of being lodged in the brain.
Mm.
So in brain spotting, we call it a trauma capsule. And
Mhm.
it's not an actual capsule, but it's obviously some sort of unmetabolized experience that's in there. And the wonderful thing about EMDR and also brain spotting is they were actually able to find a point in the visual field. With EMDR, we're going back and forth, and with brain spotting, we're finding a certain location that finds that neural pathway that's associated with that trauma and kind of dislodges it and allows it to reprocess. So
Wow.
it's really powerful in that emotions and memories can come up, and it's very fluid. It's a very fluid process, and the brain starts to make all sorts of connections when we're having these experiences of reprocessing. So it's really magical to watch people in the process, because sometimes you might start off and they're feeling really sad. And I've seen people go from sad to laughing to having, almost convulsing at some points, because they don't really need to know. Sometimes they will get, very clear images or emotions. And sometimes I've seen people just sitting there, just rocking, because their body is doing the processing for them, and they don't actually need to know what it was from.
Mm. When you're describing that, it made me think of, like when we misuse some of our muscles, like hunching over a desk or whatever, and we get these knots in our muscle groups, and we have to have somebody come out and like process them, like work them out of our system to like reorganize them so that they're smooth again. And that's kind of what I thought of when you define those capsules of experiences, that it's kind of like a brain massage of sorts to try to get the knots out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy for it. I
Yeah.
think, it is something, trauma is something that we really need to unwind. And that's why, we will have experiences long after the event that
Mm-hmm.
are triggering to us, because the body remembers. We
Mm-hmm.
might think, why is something like this triggering me? And we might not know why. And we don't always need to know why. Insight can be very, very helpful, but when we are doing processing work, sometimes the body just is able to process that without us needing to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, especially as you said, with, early childhood trauma where maybe even language wasn't fully formed, we might not ever have to be able to describe the words or the impact on us. So it seems like a very important way of working through that. So how does it actually work, and how are the mechanisms of it different from EMDR?
Yeah. So um, with EMDR, we're actually, you'll see a practitioner generally taking the eyes from left to right,
Mm-hmm.
almost as if you were hypnotizing someone, which you're not, to make that very clear.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually more similar to what you would see if someone was in REM, because often in REM, people's eyes are flickering when they're doing that. Now, with brain spotting, we don't actually take the eyes from left to right. We are finding a certain spot in the visual field. So we find that together with the client, and there are often multiple spots.
Mm-hmm.
And you will you will often know without them telling you, because there will be a reflex in that spot. So sometimes someone might lick their lips, or they might jolt, or they might take a big breath. And that's a signal that there's something deeper going on there.
Mm. Interesting.
So we'll often land in that space for a while. And what's really important about brain spotting is we call it dual attunement. So you're working with your brain spotting therapist, and they are really tuning into you as an anchor for you. They're watching your body process, and the nervous systems are becoming in sync to help you metabolize that trauma. So the person is doing internal processing, but they're also processing um, subconsciously and silently with the therapist. So a good therapist will be tuning in very intently, watching this person, and often staying quite silent, but just making sure that that person's not getting overwhelmed.
Mm.
And we're always working with the body. We're always working with the body, just making sure that that person's tuned into the body. If there's a point where they get too overwhelmed, that we take them back and we ground them. Um, but it's a really powerful process that, often can go on for an hour or longer and have different stages to it.
Wow. Well, there was a recent study, the Horton study, that just looked at the effectiveness of this and, found that it was very effective in treating post-traumatic stress disorder and that, it's working at a level kind of below the language. And what are you seeing in terms of some of the research on the impact of this method?
Yeah, it's very much in early stage research right now. Um, Unlike EMDR, which has been around a lot longer, there is a lot stronger research for the EMDR, for more conditions with EMDR. But brain spotting is relatively young as a modality. So it's only been around for 20 years. And I believe there have been some bigger scale studies, but the evidence is still very much growing.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping that in the next, decade that we can see a lot more coming out. But at the moment, I would say there are more smaller trials and things like that have come out, like the one that you've described. I'll have to put some more in the show notes as well, because I don't have memory of all of them right now.
Yeah. Yeah. If people want to dig into some of those findings, we'll have all the links in the show notes. So let's just wrap up with some strategy. If someone is out there, maybe they're curious about this new form of healing from trauma, especially early childhood trauma that seems to get stuck in the body. What could be a first step? And I mean, I can't imagine there's many brain spotting therapists out there. How do you go about finding one? And can it work virtually? And what do you also want to say to the mental health community at large about the impact of this and how we can help make it grow?
Most definitely. I would say that body-based therapies are becoming, a lot more popular. Certainly
Mhm.
where I'm from, in LA, somatic approaches are really emphasized right now, which is exciting. And I'm hoping that the field starts to be more accepting of these therapies. Brain spotting, there are a lot of practitioners, and we have on the website, you can find practitioners. I can put that in the
What
show
was
notes. It's the main brain spotting website, so I'll just have to get the URL for that. But you can type it in, and most certainly you can do virtual or in person. Um, I think it's really an effective thing to do online as well. I know a lot of people really like in person, but the thing about brain spotting and somatic type of work is that actually it's quite nice to be in the comfort of your home or wherever you like to be, because sometimes you might be making sound, or
yeah,
you want to feel really, really comfortable in the space. So, I was actually trained online. I've done some trainings in person and I've done some online, but I work all online. And I know a lot of wonderful brain spotting practitioners out there. So I would highly encourage people to experience it. Also be aware that, deep trauma work is something that should be done when people are feeling stable, that they
yeah,
have a baseline, that you've kind of got some of the groundwork done. You've got a good relationship with the person you know. So most brain spotting or EMDR practitioners are not going to throw you into really strong processing work as you just start out. But if
Mhm.
you have an established relationship where you've been doing therapy for a while and you're feeling stuck, I would absolutely try this, because it was really the thing that moved the needle for me and just completely expanded my understanding of how trauma works, how the body works, and really allowed me to process things that I could most certainly not do at a verbal level.
Wow. Well, Julia, thank you so much for what an incredible journey and story you have to share. I think it can give people a lot of hope when they are feeling so stuck that there are more options for them to pursue. If Is there any final thought you want to leave people and make sure that they walk away with?
A final thought. A final thought would be really do take the time to explore some of these things if you're feeling stuck, because I do feel like working at the surface level, um, for many people, you may feel held, but changing patterns takes time and
Mhm.
it does take deeper work and to be patient with the process. But I would encourage people to give it a go. I will be starting to run group brain
Oh,
spotting online for people as well. So if that's of something that is of interest for people, they can certainly just submit through my contact form on my website, and I would introduce them to the group.
great. And we'll put all of that in there. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, they can go onto my website and fill in the contact form just with their email and their details. Um, and yeah, they can contact me through there or also on Instagram at Jules Hassall.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your passion for this. And I can't wait to meet you in person. Hopefully, our paths will cross soon. Thanks to our team out there making this come into your ears or your eyes if you're watching it on YouTube. And that's, of course, David and Elias and Chase and Stacy and many others behind the scenes here. And thank you, listeners, for making this a big part of your day to day to open your mind to new ways of being. So, we'll close with my motto, which is open your heart, challenge your thinking, and take action to save lives. Together, we can restore dignity and sustain a passion for living.